Hello, everybody. This is podcast number 18 already, and Primitive Substance Channel, Dennis Young, and a very special guest today, writer, author Rob Young, and he's written some fantastic books. One of them right here, which we'll go over. Rob, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Dennis.
Good, good.
Great to
So
be
go
here.
back to your background. Uh, are you where you're from and how you got started in writing, etc.
Yeah, well, I kind of started writing about music when I moved to London in around 93. Way
Okay.
back then, I was very drawn there by being interested in music, really, going to lots of gigs and wanting to be involved somehow. Also, I was super interested in music writing. I was a big fan of a lot of the UK music press at the time. This was pre-internet, so we used to get all
Right.
our music info from publications like the New Musical Express and Melody Maker, weekly music publications, which kind of
Okay.
were weekly. There was a real churn of new material, and journalists were really on the lookout for new stuff all the time. So there was a lot of dynamism in writing on music at the time. But there was also this kind of quite unusual, slightly left field monthly magazine called The Wire, which I was also super interested in. And right at that point in the early 90s, it had gone from being a kind of pretty jazz focused magazine in the 80s to kind of wanting to expand a lot more and recognize that jazz has a lot of different connections with other kinds of music. It's hard to think
Right.
about isolation. And it just seemed like a super open magazine, especially at the time, that was really drawing a lot of interesting connections between very different kinds of music, and also that wasn't so interested necessarily in latching on to absolutely the newest, youngest band around. It actually was
Right.
really celebrating music making as an art form and taking it really seriously. And a lot of the writers that I admired also were kind of starting to kind of migrate over to write articles for The Wire. So, I
Okay.
mean, long story short, I kind of was working in a job. I was actually working in a record store
How about
outside
that?
where I was kind of had access to a lot of quite unusual music that I could borrow and really kind of do a lot of homework on. But at that time, I also just started off my own bat, just writing record reviews and sending them first off to the guys at The Wire, in fact, because I
How
just thought
about
that was
that?
an
That's a
interesting thing.
very experimental thing. That's really a great magazine because it's really dives into a lot of experimental music that a lot of like the quote unquote musos really digest every word of.
Yeah,
So
well, great.
so keep
Yeah,
going.
it was still sort of like struggling to find its niche at that point in a way. But anyway, the bottom line was I kind of I really wanted to really try and get involved in writing on music. So they very kindly eventually published some of my work, and then around the same time, I just decided to moved down to London, jack in my job, and I kind of offered to work as a sort of intern for a while. And it
Okay.
was just really good timing because they needed somebody because it was a very small number of people working there. And just as a result of that, I just kind of got hired and became the deputy editor for most of the
Oh
90s,
wow.
and then eventually became the editor in 2000. So I was kind of the editor for the first half of the 2000s. And
Wow.
yeah, it's been a long connection with The Wire. Yeah.
Now, what was your first book that you published in music? I see you have a number of them here. Was it the Fairport Convention? Was that your book? One of your books?
It's not a book specifically on Fairport Convention. I think maybe Amazon had a kind of extract from a bigger
Oh, I
book
see.
that's focused on Fairport Convention. What it was after many years working on the staff of The Wire, which is very time consuming. I was really keen to do more long-term projects like book writing, for example. Uh, so around the kind of mid 2000s, I really got interested in kind of investigating what does folk music mean in Britain.
Oh,
There's
okay.
loads and loads of literature about American folk, as you probably know. I mean,
No, of course.
there's loads of books, great books on, all the back history of the blues, Appalachian folk, the roots of Dylan, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
I was sort of like increasingly kind of listening to stuff that I loved at home, people like Nick Drake, Sandy
Oh, he's
Denny,
great, right.
Airport Convention, Pentangle, sort of a lot of these kind of 60s and 70s sort of folk artists that I just loved on a musical level. But there was nothing really to read about them, or at least
Right.
really to read about kind of how that scene hung together. I was also very aware of the whole controversy around Dylan going electric, but I wasn't quite sure I understood like what were people objecting to. So I kind of wanted to
That's
get
fine.
into that time frame and sort of understand it. But to do that, I felt I just had to go right back to the origins of the whole discovery of folk music, even back in the kind of Victorian time. So anyway, the bottom line was I ended up doing quite a big book called Electric Eden, which is sort of like a big kind of 600 or 700 page history of
Wow.
like the development of the idea of folk in Britain and the British imagination. And it's very, very concerned not only with music and kind of like the way kind of, it's also about the idea of folk and the way it's kind of been used by composers, by folk revivalists, by psychedelic rockers, and even by electronic musicians as this kind of inspirational idea that people can go back to. And you always get these periods where you get folk revivals at certain points.
Well, look at Roy Harper, right? Look what he did, right?
Exactly.
He blended in with Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
So you had that happening, and they were being influenced by this.
Totally. So I was really interested in not really looking at folk as a sort of purist tradition, but more as this thing that is kind of like been made into loads of hybrids by different people over the years. And that's kind of like the spirit of folk for me, is this thing that is constantly able to be transformed.
Right. So that must have taken you a long time to do that book. I mean, imagine.
Yeah, I think the whole thing was about 3.5 years from kind of starting to write to actually getting it finished. Three.
I got to pick that up. Your writing is great. It just keeps you really into the book and to the period the way you write. I mean, it's really fantastic. Now, you're still working for The Wire? Do you still do reviews, or are you still involved?
Very occasionally these days. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not really on the staff anymore.
Okay.
I'm kind of a co-owner of the whole company that runs The Wire.
Fantastic.
But it's I've sort of just, to be honest, I have a lot of other things going on. I don't do so much kind of reviewing these days. I write occasionally for The Wire. I also write for Uncut magazine, occasional things in other newspapers. So yeah, but it's it's just things have sort of developed a little. So yeah,
if you could write a book about the post-punk era in New York, especially around 99 Records and everything that happened there, there really it needs to be a book on that.
That would be amazing. Period. That would be really good. I mean, it should really be a New Yorker doing that, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But you're a good writer. You'll find it. But it's just that was an epicenter at that time of everything happening. And we, Liquid, were very lucky to find that label at the time, and we were just in the right place at the right time, and we were unique enough to get on that label and happen. So it was quite a period to be playing music.
I bet. Yeah, I mean, it's still, still the music of that time, and what you guys did, it really still stands out. Something very unique.
That's what it was.
So exciting times. Yeah.
So I found you with from that Can book, All Gates Open, and I couldn't put it down. It's such a great book. I mean, it really dives into the whole history of Can and how they started. So You want to explain a little bit about that and Ermin, how you met him and how this all happened?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Can had always been pretty much my favorite group, going right back to the late 80s when I first heard music by them. At that time, I was kind of still just coming out of my teens and into early 20s. I had friends who we used to listen to loads of records together. One of them had some Can albums. They were really hard to find at that time. You really had to, they weren't kind of in print, the early Can albums. So you really had to go to record fairs, and they were sort of like almost religious objects if anyone
That's true.
lucky enough to have one.
You're right.
And but yeah, a total revelation. I think hearing records like Future Days, which is on your T-shirt there,
Right, of course.
Mr. Movie and these things, and so there wasn't very much information about the band out there at the time. Then in '89 they got together again, and recorded one final album, which came out right at that moment, called Right Time. And so then they did a bit of press around that time, so it was possible to kind of read interviews with them. So that brought them a bit more into focus. And I guess so then anyway, sort of like fast forward a few years, and I'm working for The Wire, and they, in 1997, I think it was, there was this album that came out, which was Can remixes. It was an album called Sacrilege. And you know, the 90s, that was the great era when everyone was remixing everyone else. That was like that was like totally in the air. I think there was even Liquid remixes around that time.
We've had a lot of liquid remixes.
Yeah,
I'm kind of getting tired of so many Cavern remixes. It's just after the point, it's enough. But anyway, go ahead.
So anyway, so that was an opportunity. They were really promoting that album. It was Mute Records in Britain who were putting it out. And, so there was a sort of promotional push on it, and I got the chance to go to Cologne, meet them, to do an interview, and kind of met them in the original Inner Space studio, which was still there, still actually being used as a studio in this little village outside of Cologne. It was an old cinema which had been built before the Second World War, which Can bought in the early 70s, and that was the place where they basically installed themselves and just played and played and played for hours and hours every day, pretty much throughout the 70s. And you know, they developed those incredible grooves and incredible sounds. The studio was still there, and the bands were all still alive. And so basically, I met them. I had a day in the studio. I met with Ermin Schmidt and Mikhail Karoli and Holger Shukai and Jackie Lieberzeit. They were all there. We did a whole day of interviews. I wrote a cover story for The Wire, which was just, you know, incredible fun. It was one of those things, you know, say don't meet your idols, but actually that was one of those times when it was great meeting your idols, because they're really
sure was
people. All very different personalities, but very generally pretty willing to share memories, even though they'd probably had to do it many times before in the past. But I think, you know, at that point, you know, essentially they weren't an active band in the sense they weren't playing live together anymore. They weren't intending to actively record any more music or anything, but they were very happy. There was another generation through this remix album. There was a younger generation that was being turned onto their music, and it made a lot of sense in that particular moment in the late 90s when everyone was talking about post-rock and you know, these different kind of interesting fusions that were going on between electronic production and live playing, and, you know, techno and experimental rock and improvisation and so on, you know, all elements that were totally central to Can and what they did. So they sort of made a lot of sense. at that point. You know, and it was a very well received article. There was a lot of anyway new interest in the whole kind of German experimental rock scene going on. A lot of reissues of all the other bands from that period, like Amon Düll and Popov,
Right. I remember
you
them.
know, Faust, and
Oh yeah.
you know, it was just like coming right back into the frame, really, that amazing creative
Yeah.
period
Right.
in Germany. So anyway, I mean, what's nice about the whole Can sort of family is that you know, they're good at kind of keeping in touch, and they like to sort of invite people into their sort of loose circle if they, you know, if they feel some kind of, I don't know, connection. And I got a call not so long after that article came out from Hildegard Schmidt, who's the wife of Ermin Schmidt, one of
Right. I
the
remember that.
who's
Right.
been manager of the band since the early 70s, and now, you know, running their whole operation and record label. It's called Spoon Records. And I got invited to contribute to a book which they were publishing about
Oh,
Can.
okay.
A big book of just kind of transcribed interviews with the band, but they wanted to
Oh,
also
okay.
someone like myself who was younger, who wasn't around at the time, to write my thoughts about all of their albums.
How about that?
Did that, and you know, that was really fun. You know, that was just a good, and that was like the whole discography. So I really sort of like went into the whole thing for the first time. And you know, from then on, we just, you know, I sort of on and off kept in touch with Hildegard and Ermin, and there were times, you know, I interviewed various members of the band over the years. They were doing various other projects and so on. So I kind of kept in touch and followed what they were doing. You know, they were all still active. You know, Ermin Schmidt, active as a kind of composer.
Oh yeah.
Still composing
He's great.
really bizarre operas based on old sort of Gothic texts.
I mean,
And
he's an amazing avant-garde musician. I mean, he's
he is,
like one of
and
the
that's where
innovators of
his
all
roots are
this.
totally as a sort of avant-garde composer in the John Cage
Yep.
generation, you know,
Oh
in the
yeah.
50s. So he's absolutely for real. And then, you know, and he also did a kind of electronica project with a younger British producer called Kumo at the same time. And then Jackie, the drummer, was involved. He sort of had his own kind of drum workshop in Cologne, which is kind of legendary. And he also was drumming with a guy called Bernd Friedman, who's a really amazing electronica producer.
What I
Also,
liked about Can was they actually were, you know, innovated with younger musicians. They so collaborated. That made such an impact, I think.
I agree. I mean, there was never a sense that they felt like they'd grown too old for this nonsense. You know,
Right.
I think they really had a strong and genuine belief in the power and the importance of music and sound. And they were really, and they did not, one thing they didn't like is the idea of a kind of Can tribute. So, you know, they
Oh,
would
okay.
be interested in the idea of like a band that sounds like Can now. You know, what they wanted was to hear like what is the innovative sounds now that like back in the 70s, Can was sounding like very little else, right? What they would
Right,
be
right.
interested in is what is it now that sounds like very little else. You know, they didn't want it. They weren't interested in a tribute band, you know, and they never reformed to play the greatest hits or, you know, to play a classic album on stage. You know, that is
Oh,
absolutely
okay.
anti the Can spirit, right? It
Right,
was all
right.
moving it forward all the time, which is, you know, well into their, you know, 70s. And now, I mean, Ermin, who, you know, who's the only surviving one of the sort of instrumental founders, you know, I mean, you know, he still has exactly the same attitude.
Well,
Um,
I think what music does for you, you know, it doesn't limit your age. You don't think about age when you play. I play with musicians that are 30 years old, 40, older, younger. But once you're playing it, just taken away. It's music, regardless of the age. And I think Can really prove that. And all the people they played with, like you said.
totally, yeah. No, so I mean, they all had interesting things going on with younger musicians, and so it was kind of into that that I kind of got invited to do this book,
Wow.
which, remember, that's what you asked me about.
Oh yeah, well, I think it's a terrific book. Anybody out there that's into Can really should read your book. I couldn't put it down. It was just so much great. If you're into the band, so much great stuff. And I didn't realize about all the taping that they did, and they took some of that and put it on their records. It seemed like everything was so fresh and live. It was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard in a way to, if you're really familiar with the records, it's even for me, who'd listened to them, many, many times over before actually coming to write this book, there were lots of things that when I actually talked to them, there's all sorts of sounds that you maybe think are, I don't know, like coming from percussion, that are
Right, right.
actually came from a synthesizer, or that they're, that you think that, oh yeah, this must have been played completely live, but no, it's actually a kind of collage of lots of like little bits. I mean, there's, it's really hard to pin it down, which is what's really
Yes,
amazing.
yes.
I mean, it really was a music kind of made with, using technology. But using it in a quite sort of improvised way, because they just had to kind of invent their own systems, especially in the beginning.
I'm
They started
sure.
jamming in this kind of art space which they were given in Cologne, and they just really had a 2-track reel-to-reel.
That's amazing. That's what really fascinating.
So they just had to kind of like, they recorded themselves playing live with the microphones of the day, of the late 60s.
That's amazing.
Sometimes using lengths of tape which they'd stolen from the studios of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
So God knows what they were taping over, but anyway, it was an amazing sort of like moment in time where all this was happening around them. But they would sort of record on these tapes, then they would have to bounce down the tracks and record a vocal over the top, or and work out how to do that. And because it wasn't until, I mean, they'd been going for 7 years before they got their first 24-track mixing.
See, that's what's really fascinating. And I like the fact on your book you said that they would start a jam and it wouldn't go any place at first. And then all of a sudden they would lock into this some kind of groove or something that would just take this music off and feel it. That was really fascinating too. They would start some of the jams and it wouldn't feel right, and it kept playing, and then something would happen. It would click.
Exactly. And the beauty of it was, for them, was that they had this luxury of having a permanent space where they could do
Right.
that. And the interesting thing about Can, maybe they could only have existed when they did, because it's kind of like a golden age when you look back. A time,
Right.
it's a moment when they could actually have a deal with a fairly large record label. So they could actually kind of get paid enough to, live a reasonably good life for a musician.
Right.
So not really so much having to worry about that. And so be able to rent, a really cheap recording space with very little interference, and just actually use that time to play and play, and like you say, just work up those grooves, push it past, if you were sort of like renting a studio by the hour, you maybe
Right, of course.
you wouldn't be able to push it past a certain point.
No.
You wouldn't be able to push the music into a certain space. They could, and they let it happen, and they were happy to start at I don't know, middle of the day, and just go on, maybe on the same rhythm or groove for
Right. Well,
until...
we had to record it, in jams. From jams we had on a cassette, and then listen back, and then maybe we turn those into songs. But we didn't have that luxury. When we went in the studio, especially the last couple records, we had to have the material ready, somewhat ready. But Can had that luxury. You're right. And 5 amazing musicians, and then you had Malcolm Mooney too. I mean, he was just, You Do Right is just such an intense song.
Absolutely, yeah.
Monster Movie is just, that's the first record I got from Can at a cutout at a record store,
Wow.
2.99.
Okay.
And it was a
Great.
cutout. They cut it, and I listened to it. I said, "Wow, this band's amazing." And then I just kept buying the rest of their records and turned the guys on to that band. They didn't know too much about Can as I did. I was into a lot of German prog music and British prog, so that's where that came from. But your book really tied everything in together, the whole how everything happened. And I didn't realize how much touring they did. They did a
Yeah,
lot of shows, didn't they?
they did. They did, and yeah, in Europe. I mean, that was sort of the interesting thing because I, again, like when I started out on the book, I was obviously going to look into their live history and so on, and I was actually quite. I don't know why it surprised me, but I actually kind of had assumed, for example, they must have played in the States, but they never played the States.
How about that? Amazing.
Yeah, they never did a full world tour. They were actually very close to doing one. They were supposed to. They signed a deal with an American label in the mid-70s, and there was a kind of misunderstanding that they thought they'd been promised a US tour as a part of that contract, but there was some kind of mix-up about it, and it didn't happen. So unfortunately, America missed out. It's really interesting
That's
to speculate. What if? What if?
I know.
By maybe you would have seen them. Maybe.
I mean, I know.
Happened 5 years earlier.
I know. I wish it did because I was a big fan.
But but anyway, they did. I mean, of course, they played a lot in Germany. They played. They were really big in France.
Okay.
They played great shows in France. They also toured a lot in the UK.
How about that?
That's kind of like, but it's really there. Like those three territories is pretty much exclusively where they played. There's like one or two festivals in Portugal, Spain. Something in one date in Austria. They had a residency in Switzerland very early on in their career.
How about that?
Never in Scandinavia, never in Italy.
That's amazing because the Italians, Italy really loves that kind of music.
Yeah,
I'm
I think
surprised they never got over there. That's something.
Yeah. So they did those things. They did, I guess, what they needed to do. They also kind of it's quite apparently they used to drive in their own separate cars to the shows and back again.
How about that?
Because the great thing about like Europe, I mean, it's I don't know if you from a kind of US perspective, but it's actually like driving from Cologne to Paris. It's not actually that far. It feels like
no, right. We've done that. That's
so
what happens.
Europe is your sort of, your territory in a way, and it's fairly easy to get around. So you can do these kind of things. So yeah, they would often drive to a French date and then back again.
Right. Oh, we never played in the UK. The first part of the band. We never had, until the reunion shows. We never played in England.
Right.
It's another strange thing. We played in other countries, but the UK we never played. I don't know what happened. So, but you never know what happens with getting to these places or how to get a tour or anything. Now they played mostly. They did outdoor festivals too, didn't they? At one point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Germany, France had some great outdoor festivals going on. When I asked Ermin what was his favorite ever live show, and he keeps talking about this. Outdoor festival in a place called Arles in France, Arles. And I think there's a kind of big ancient Roman outdoor amphitheater there.
Oh wow!
There was a fantastic sounding summer festival which had I think had like Kevin Ayers played and
wow, like him
and Can played, and apparently. It was just like the perfect kind of atmosphere, midsummer sky, warm. They were just in an incredible mood. Their audience was brilliant, and I mean, there are recordings of it. Actually, there is a
there is
fairly lo-fi bootleg that I have on an MP3, which is where you can get a sense of it. It does sound really good, but it's pretty fuzzy. But they never played. Funnily enough, they never played Glastonbury Festival in Britain.
How about that?
Big one.
That would have been a hit.
They actually really do. UK festivals they actually didn't do, as far as I know. It tended to be just like tours, around the whole of Britain and Scotland and medium-sized venues generally. But I think I'm right in saying they didn't actually do any of the bigger outdoor festivals there. Yeah.
Is there anything more coming out? I mean, I've seen some rare videos on YouTube, but do they have anything in storage, like more live, like video?
Yeah, I mean, it seems, because I mean, I was going to say that's what's interesting about Can is that even though they have a kind of canon of albums, recorded between the late 60s and when they broke up in 78.
Right.
What they've been doing in the last few years is putting out their own live. They call it a live bootleg series, and basically they've because there's so many tapes circulating around unofficially. They kind of wanted to take ownership over that side of the recorded quality. So they've been processing, with the help of some great sound engineers, they've kind of been trying to get the best out of, what are mostly, not super hi-fi recordings, but at least trying to sort of you can do a lot more with digital technology now. You can clean things up a lot better than you used to be able to.
Sure.
So there's been this live series, which I think has been 5 or so releases so far, and there's a new one just about to come out.
Oh, now is there a link to this? I'll put in the description the link.
Yeah, you could do. I mean, it's all being done via Mute Records again. So I think if you go to the Mute site,
I know them.
they should be listed there. They've been really beautifully packaged. Everything's got liner notes, and they sound pretty good. But I think what's really interesting, like I said, is that the Can that we thought we knew from the studio is now, the more live stuff you hear, the more you realize that studio Can is only one part of what Can were about.
How about that?
When they went on stage, they let loose in a whole other way, and you just see all the other. You get a kind of glimpse of maybe all the other stuff they used to get up to.
Right.
And what could happen when they weren't limited to an LP side length.
Right. Okay.
And they actually felt, because the typical Can gig used to last around about 2.5 hours.
Wow.
Imagine that. Sometimes with an interval, but still you'd get possibly more than an hour's uninterrupted Can in each half. And that's quite something,
It is.
And then they could really kind of open up, and sometimes you hear themes. I mean, it's almost like in classical music or jazz, when often a band would take a sort of really a familiar theme or a hook and sort of improvise around it, like John Coltrane and My Favorite Things, kind of like just taking it out into the cosmos for an hour.
Wow.
And we're sort of doing something similar. Sometimes you can hear threads of a certain track that from an album just popping up, but then it kind of just like disappears into the ocean, and it kind of, and they off they go. But also the live shows are also full of completely new tracks that that never actually got sort of officially recorded. So there's tons of stuff there, and it also really reveals their incredible range. They could do everything from
I know, I can imagine. I can just imagine
crafted songs. They when they wanted to write a 3-minute pop song, like Moonshake or
right.
They could totally do it. But at the same time, they could do noise freakouts. They could do experimental music like Aum, which is that incredible track on the Targo Margo album. They could do these amazing funk jams like Hallelujah. for 20, 25 minutes, or You Do Right. You know, I mean, what a phenomenally
Oh, yeah.
versatile bunch of guys. It really, really is extraordinary. So
Now,
that's what's exciting, is now that there's still life in
yeah,
Cannes, because
that's
we're
amazing.
still getting these live recordings.
I don't think this band will die out as far as people listening to them and getting something out of it. And did they record all their shows? Is that how, or their,
No, they didn't do it officially. So I mean, really, a lot of the live stuff that survives has been a mixture of, you know, just random fans, you know, going in
fans
with a tape
taping it?
recorder. There were a couple of guys, especially in the UK, who were real fans and used to try and get to shows, and you know, had a portable tape recorder.
Mm,
It was sometimes, they did tell me that they were supposed to do an official live album in 1972, and they kind of set everything up with a mobile recording truck outside a venue in Cologne.
right.
There was some kind of jinx, and some
Oh,
tracks, some of the instrumental tracks didn't record, and
oh,
you know, so they sort of yeah, you can hear that there's a kind of funny film they made, which is probably on YouTube, where they sort of edited bits of live footage and bits of studio footage. It's a little kind of mini documentary of Cannes, and I
okay. I
think
gotta look that up.
the concert where they were supposed to be recording is on that film. But they kind of re-recorded the music in the studio to fit to
Oh man,
the live footage. But I mean, in a way, that's very Cannes, I think. You know, like it's
right.
sort of based. It doesn't really matter so much whether it was constructed after or if it was live, because a lot of the music of Cannes is a real blur between those two.
And it's
And
in the moment group. You know what was while they were feeling at
yeah,
that time. You know that's what I think was came what I came from, and especially reading the book too. I mean, I've learned so much that I didn't know about. I mean, and it's just a great book. Are you selling some copies of it? Are people
I
enjoying it? Are
mean,
you getting
yes,
sales?
that's it there.
Yep, I have it. Great
Can or
book.
Fates Open. No, I mean, it came out in
Fantastic book.
28. Thank you. Thanks, Dennis. It came out in 2018. So I mean, you know, it's still in print. There's both a UK and a US edition, so it should be available over there as well still.
That's great.
So yeah, you know, it's still out there. Yeah.
I'll put that a link definitely in the description. So, what are you working on now? What's some of the new? Are you working on a new book or anything? Exploring
Yeah,
anything
I
new?
am. I've just
Okay.
kind of started dabbling in the shallow waters of the next one. So I think it's going to be quite a big one again.
Oh wow.
I seem to sort of
Yeah. Ah,
I seem to sort of like set myself these quite difficult challenges. I don't know if it's going to
but
work, but
but the
anyway,
way you write it seems to go, pretty fast because you got the reader that wants to keep reading it.
that's
That's I think the key to a good author is I read a lot, and if a book I really like, I don't want to put down. And your book, All Gates Open, was I have to read some of your other books was really that way. So everybody out there, I'm telling you, get it. So, but keep going now. What you're working on?
Well, yeah, I'll just very broadly. I won't go into too much detail because it's
That's
quite early
okay.
days. But it's basically kind of like I'm writing something about more generally about cosmic music. So it's kind of like trying to sort of understand the idea of cosmic in music
Okay.
across a massively wide range of different musics in different time periods. So
No, I'm sure there is. I mean,
it's kind of follows, you know, there's elements of that in Cannes, I think. But yeah, many other kinds. It's funny that you know, there's many different kinds of music that refer to ideas about space and about a sense of sort of like eternity or interconnectedness, which you could say is cosmic. But it's also interesting how astronomers quite often use musical ideas to try and explain discoveries about the universe as well. You think about the music of the spheres, which is an old
Right.
idea. You think about superstring theory, which is actually an idea that about these sort of vibrating strings, like a violin string, so you can get these kind of different dimensions. Like if you one string on a guitar could be a D note, but it could also be an E note, right? And it's sort of so it can kind of express a different sort of vibration or a different dimension of sound even. And that's a sort of very, very, very simplified idea behind the idea of superstring theory in quantum physics. So it's sort of I guess I'm sort of interested in trying to draw together a lot of the connections between music and sound and space and the cosmic. And I'm probably going to completely do my head in, but anyway, we'll see.
Well, one of my favorite space cosmic players was David Allen from Gong.
Yeah.
He had that glissando guitar,
right?
And he played it with some kind of, I guess I don't know if it was something from a piece of metal that he had from his guitar. I don't know what he used, but I saw him a few times. But he had a whole band. He put a record together with I don't know, like 6 or 7, and the music was so incredible. I don't know if you're going to include him in your book.
Yeah, I think he's going to get a mention. Yeah,
Gong was a great band. I saw David Allen solo in the '80s in New York. We used to did these solo shows, and he was quite an incredible player. The way he got that sound. You had Pink Floyd. There's a whole range of bands that were trying to get that cosmic feel. For sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when do you plan on having this out next year, or is it?
No, I think it's going to be a few years away, Dennis.
Okay.
I think it's quite a big research project.
It sounds like
it's one of those things that the more you go into it, the bigger it gets. It's like the way that the universe is supposed to be expanding. It's
exactly.
like the more you start looking for cosmic music, the more of it there is.
Once you start, that's it, right? It just keeps going.
Exactly.
Now, who would thought Can would fill so many pages, right, in a book? But
exactly, that's one band. That's one band,
right? One band, but they just had so much happening with all these sounds, and you had all this Stockhausen influence, and the jockey was just like a machine. He was a drum machine.
He was a drum machine that started out as a jazz player. So
that's what's amazing.
He thought that playing free was too limiting.
Right. Well, if you look at Bill Bruford, right? He started as jazz, and he got in Yes, and he turned everything around with his playing.
Yeah.
Of the band. So that's fantastic. So this has been a great interview. And are you based in Norway? Is that where you live?
Yeah, I am. I've lived in Oslo for 12 years now. So
wow.
It's become my home. But yeah.
Must be a nice place to live there. I'm in crowded New Jersey here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. The winters are a bit too long for me. But apart from that, it's you get very extreme winters, but you get really lovely warm summers as well. So it's kind of
I'm sure. We went to Norway. We played in Norway, one gig and flew back.
Okay.
It was the craziest thing, a crazy little festival, and I forget the name of the town now, but it was just really bizarre. Beautiful place, though, but we could have done more shows, but Liquid did a lot of one-off shows.
Right.
In Europe. We'd do one show and fly back.
Huh.
We couldn't get any more gigs. I don't know what happened, but it was beautiful there. Beautiful country.
It is lovely. Yeah. Very happy.
So where can we find you on? Just go to your website. Is there a website that you have? Or
I haven't actually been so good with websites. So there is one for the Electric Eden book, but you'll see it's updated now for many.
I gotta pick that up.
I'm afraid I've become a bit lazy with the sort of too much online engagement. I sort of very occasionally update Facebook, but I sort of I just feel like a lot of you need a lot of concentration for the stuff I do, and I find that it's easy to get sucked into some discussion or argument, and
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well,
so,
I've tried to leave politics and religion out of this YouTube channel. All music. I don't want to get involved in any of that kind of stuff because, it gets ugly and people start arguing, and then it's not a positive show anymore because you have some people that have strong views about this or that, left, right, whatever. But what other channels or other people worry about it? We want to talk about music here. People like yourself doing these great books. So,
great.
Rob, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for doing this.
Dennis, we should probably just point out as far as I know, we are not related, despite the name.
No, I don't think so. Maybe, but you never know. I have like some German heritage myself. Maybe that's why I like Cannes so much, because my father's side is from Germany.
Oh, really?
German descent. So maybe that's why I became such a huge Cannes fan. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I like this kind of music anyway. I like experimental music, so it just makes sense that they're one of the bands that I was influenced by, even as a kid, 19, 20 years old.
Wow.
I was listening to Cannes. So we had a great record store by our house, all these cutouts from Germany, England, and I was able to stock up on all this fantastic music. So,
fantastic. You're very lucky. Yeah.
I were. So, Rob, it was a pleasure. Thanks for being on, and keep in touch.
Yeah, you too, Dennis.
Thank you, Nell. Thanks for being on. Take care. Thanks, now. Bye-bye.